We attempted to approach this conversation today to explore art as a form of conversation. And on the run-up to today, everything in me was initially attempting to sidestep the formal conversation about what is art. I wonder if I can try to bring now almost a way to look at the space we have entered and been in over the last this first part of the conversation, and look at it from another angle. Without the challenge is, can I do that without losing that unformed, in the moment emerging, unscripted space? Okay, so we've been now inside for a bit, art as a conversation. Because what we wanted to do here and are seeking to do here in Portals is to escape the traditional way that people come into domains. And then I still ask myself the question, so what is a way to think about art? And what surfaced was a little story of how it is typically and generally approached in the world, and perhaps an alternative way or an alternative dimension to bring into it, which in many ways we have already entered right as we started the conversation. Okay, so here we go. Most of the time, when the subject of art will come up in the world, we will have two main schools of thought. One school of thought will focus on the art, and the second will focus on the artist. And you'll have people that will say, well, art is simply a reflection or a mirror of the artist. All we need to know is to deeply appreciate the story of the artist, what they've gone through, what they've experienced, their pain, their inspiration. And then there are those that will say, yes, but the art then becomes an object by itself, and it has a value by itself. And we have to be able to look at the art and almost separate it from the feelings and the intentions of the artist, and look at it almost in an objective way in terms of the form, the structure, the style, perhaps the period in history when that form of art appeared. Are we looking at a classical period or the romantic period or whatever? And sometime you'll have the people that will obviously integrate both the conversation about art as a form, as a structure, as a design, as a something that has even formal rules in various spaces, and will want to integrate the artist, her feelings and intentions into the conversation. Well, I feel that we have attempted in the first part of our conversation to sidestep all that and essentially say we are interested to go beyond that dual focus, beyond focusing on the person or focusing on the object of art. And we did not really ask the question, we immediately stepped into a space that in a way is an answer to this question, which is, what is a way to shift from the dualistic focus, one that goes beyond focusing on a person and or on the object of art, or both. How can we transcend that and engage another dimension? And so when I thought about that, the question that appeared was that all forms of art aim to transfer something. What is it? And in many ways, we have already answered that in the first part of the conversation. We answered in some ways what is the substance that's seeking transference. So I will unfold this story as though we didn't answer it, but the beauty is the answers are already here. And as I thought, what's the way to frame the answer to this question? I thought, well, we know that the human body, or any living body, that it takes in food, and when the body is short of a specific nutriment or vitamin, well, we experience it by craving a certain food. And in a similar fashion, the body takes in water. And when we are not sufficiently hydrated, we thirst for water. And in a third place, in a similar way, the lungs take in air, and when we are short of oxygen, we feel that we are truly suffocating and are desperately gasping for air. So what can we say beyond these three? Well, we can say that the fourth element that the human system depends on, in addition to solid food, to water, to air, is really impression. The energetic impressions that come to us in variety of forms. When the inner lives, when the spirit, when the soul yearn for these new impressions, well, that's when we seek and when we create art. This is why it was so compelling that right when we started the conversation out, you said, for me, art is the place where we find intimacy with life, where we begin to develop a different kind of relationship with life. You were answering that question before we even asked it. So then I thought, okay, so what's a way to describe it in conceptual terms? Because some people will feel and get the sense and the feeling of the first part of the conversation, and they will still want us to conceptualize it. So here is a way to conceptualize it. So the shift from the dualistic focus is to attempt to integrate the invisible element, and the entire part of this first part of the conversation was we were exploring and sensing and intuiting the energetic, the essence, the invisible dimension. So all of a sudden, when we begin to talk about that third dimension, we can describe not just the artist and the art, but we can describe the journey or the exploration or the endeavor of the artist to develop, as you were describing out, contact, communication, connection with that essence. And perhaps, Rita, what you were describing with those Hungarian dances, that, by the way, I love so very much as well, earlier in life, though I can't trace a memory where I danced at the age of 2 for that. But perhaps that was your unrestricted, unbridled sense of the essence in that music coming to you that you were expressing in dance. So when we begin to enter this conversation where we allow ourselves to imagine and go beyond the form and the structure and the style of the art, and beyond even the feelings and the intentions, because the feelings and the intentions, they are more the endeavor of the artist to discover or come into contact with some truth, with some motivating presence. Then now the conversation completely alters, because we can ask now a new question. Not what form of art it is, not who the artist is, but we can ask a third question. What is the essence? What is the truth? What is the motivating presence that comes through the art? And I am reminded here, then I'll make the space for you to come on this, and I'm reminded here of an interview I've seen maybe 25 years ago, but it left such a powerful impression on me that I never forgot it. It was a conversation with Al Pacino. And he was talking about a time earlier in his life. He was already a known actor, but he wasn't as famous as he later became. And he was describing how he was playing in one of the Shakespearean plays. And he said the play was going well and the reviews were very positive and great, but deep inside him, he knew he still did not, I'm not going to use out your language, he still did not make the connection with the play. And he said, people loved it and it was great, but I deep inside knew I still did not understand the play. And he said, and I get shivers even when I recall that, he said on the 76th night, we were playing the show, and some 12 or 14 or 15 minutes into the first scene, the beginning of the play, something happened. He said, I don't quite know what it is, but all of a sudden, the stage, the way the stage was set, all the actors, my lines, my gestures, all of it connected up. It's as though I was able to see the play from above. I no longer played that character. I became that character. I became the play. You can say he connected to the essence of that Shakespearean play. And as a result, the performance now was imbued with a presence that initially Shakespeare sought to connect with. And as a result of that, the patron, the guests, the fans, the whoever, in whatever form of art, was able to experience that transference.
Well,
so we are talking about the process of art rather than something else. Please, yes, Aud.
Well, and when you say transference, not only that something transferred to them, but they were transported. They were there. Through his connection, they were able to perhaps experience whatever the frequency, the vitamin, the cause of that play that he petitioned to be led into. And finally, something must have aligned itself differently in him as well, from this persistence to knock on the door, that he actually got invited in. And because he was in a circumstance of sharing it, everyone there would have been also transported much closer to whatever that was about, that moment, that perhaps different time, or whatever truth, essence, vitamin, frequencies was anchored in that play. Because it's almost like artists can lodge different vitamins, different places where when we come later on in time and really manage to get in tune with what is locked in there, it becomes alive in the moment. We allow it to look into the now and the now to look into it. So it's this multi-dimensional access that has been won. And what an art. I mean, that's amazing. I know that I had the good fortune to be introduced to the concept of looking for what wrote it, what painted it, rather than who wrote it and who painted it. And that ever since has been this practice, and forgetting about it sometimes and just getting too absorbed by the end result, or the human in question, perhaps, if they're very charismatic. But this real search for what wrote it, I think it's such a freedom. It frees you both as participant in it or as witness to it, up from the like and dislike or the location of the end result, to becoming in yourself alive in the practice of detecting, of being like do you say a sleuth, like a detective into what is behind this, what is speaking through this, what's the cause, what are the causing realms, what's the causation behind this painting or this story that is transferring to me, that's moving me, or that's almost niggling, irritating me, or whatever it is. So I think that's where the journey can begin, rather than, oh, I'm looking at that end result or at that person, but to rather be really curious about what moved them to write this, what is coming through.
Well, it's making me consider the other side of the other side, or the underpinning of that connective moment when it happens in art. And I had this picture in the Al Pacino story coming to my head of Al Pacino there on stage, day after day or night after night, and many nights after the rehearsal period, like making a signal.
Yes.
Saying,
yeah, exactly.
I want to connect to this. I mean business. And because of the 70-something tries, could it be that the essence of the play, somewhere in the great bank of Shakespeare vitamin, or Shakespeare or theatrical nutriment, heard his signal and said, oh, this man means business. We're going to jump in. That's on one hand. On the other hand, what does it mean to keep signaling and to keep telling an artistic or essence connection that you mean business? There's so much shedding that needs to go on, so much that you just need to get rid of. Because I'm thinking of all the many doodles that end up in the waste paper basket to produce a Picasso drawing or painting, or any artist. And that there's the labor and the perspiration. It's not just a moment of inspiration when you're uplifted.
Is it not the case that what artists from the beginning of time in all forms of art, then in one way or shape or form, whether knowingly or unknowingly, what they aspire, what they search for is what you describe as that moment of connection, that moment when a different conversation opens up, that moment when they will describe the ecstasy of art as something else got to work through them, and they're picked up by that flow, by that energy, and it works through them. What makes it so very difficult in the world, which you both hinted to, is how even when that happens, it immediately gets characterized and placed as to do with a person, because we're so much interested in the person, the persona, the actor, the actress, the story of them, for all good reasons. What we are exploring here in this idea of art as a conversation, we are exploring a way to invite the curiosity, the inquiry, the petitioning mind to that other realm that can infiltrate through the process of art and that enable that something else. Some will call it a muse, some will call it flow, some will call it presence. The name is secondary. We're talking about something that flows through. And the distinction we are making that is so important is a difference between perhaps dead art and live art. Because well, that art can perhaps be thought of as something that was alive once, but that contact, that connection, that communion is broken or lost. Maybe because the artist got too interested in themselves and the energy that was coming their way. Maybe it's because, a lot of the time, it's because of what you talked to earlier, Rita, in the sense of the business of art, the money making. So the motivation is no longer that initial contact. And what we now have is the art has been commoditized, productized. And what is transferred is no longer the essence, but something else, almost like a packaged food, if you like, piece of art. And we are sensing, we are intuiting to the difference between that and the sense of live art, where the wires are still connected, where there is a riveting element because we don't know what's going to happen the next moment in the conversation, the next moment in the concert. And by the way, very important to note, live art can happen on the stage night after night when the artists are not there saying their lines or singing their songs. They're actually connecting to what caused in the first place that play or that song. And sometime on rare occasions, that becomes so inspiring and it develops a life of its own outside of the artists themselves, all the way to perhaps become a co-creative piece of art that can emerge with people outside and away from the original instance, to now become a communion of many inside a larger, what you described as a cathedral experience. Cathedral in that, perhaps to represent the idea of the multi-dimensional realms that open up, such that the art can echo as it does in the cathedral, because there are many of us, and the living portal that we each are gets to induct and be part of that co-creative conversation as it emerges. And I think the last thread in that to perhaps weave is, I think all artists that are still tethered to themselves, they're afraid of becoming commoditized and losing that contact. And yet the allure, the attraction of making a successful career in the world is so persuasive and so powerful, and the business of art and the money making of art is so compelling. But when that becomes louder and it overcrowds that other something else, then something is lost. Which is why we see so many artists suffering and have suffered, because the original something that they perhaps sought to find, they missed the inner formation to think about it in these terms, and B, they caught themselves up in the act and forgot to remember that initial contact and connection that inspired them in the first place.
Well, maybe the most difficult thing to escape is one's success. I'm kind of thinking on the move that an artist may have that connective moment when, that's like a lightning strikes and everyone knows, artist and audience know that something happened that is live and that is very special. And how difficult can it be, and maybe more so if it's witnessed by many and confirmed and appreciated by many, how difficult can it be to leave that behind and surrender afresh to the next moment when the connection may happen differently. I'm just in awe of anyone who is actually able to stay fresh and open and itinerant and inquiring into trying to be one step ahead. Like, where is it now? It may move. It may not be where it was last night when the audience gave a standing ovation.
What I can see from this conversation also, that unless there is this internal ongoing inquiry, in a way, conversation going on in whoever's doing the art or engaging with the art, that perhaps has within it an ongoing recentering to why they're doing it, and what it is there to feed, then it's very easy to be taken off track by anything really, and even this sense of what is it being measured against, which standards, beauty, but what if it's there to feed something completely different that doesn't really have anything to do with beauty, that has to do with innocence, which is also beautiful, but and therefore it comes across in a certain way. But if everything is measured against a certain set of standards, it might seem to fall short and be, at least in that in the more mainstream and popular realms, be dismissed. And then unless there's a process going on in the person that really builds in themselves a fortress, in a way, that would be there to also protect what comes to them, what knocks on their door because of their configuration, because of what they are moved by as alive, then they might never offer it into the world. And so I think there's also, what comes alive in me is also the responsibility of each of us as humans to honor what knocks on our door or what we feel moved by, and to not so quickly measure it against the standards of someone or something else, but really much more have a live, ongoing inquiry about, what is this? What is it for? How can I best serve it, in a way? Which also takes it away from being perhaps so quickly then influenced by, oh, look how great I'm doing, or oh, look how terrible I'm doing. It takes the focus of oneself also, which is such a pressure, I think, as anyone that sees themselves or identifies as being an artist, which I think there's nothing wrong with. It says someone has taken up in their life to respond through some of those artistic channels, and that's amazing, that's wonderful. Call yourself an artist, but then what's the work, what's the internal work that's going to really fortify your unique connections and perhaps unique blendings of vitamins that you can give a home and a space and an expression to?
Well, when you started this, now you, in a way, challenged all of us as audiences or as patrons of art to be enlightened patrons of art and audiences and supporters of art, and to be engaged in this inquiry of what is behind this piece of art, whether it's music or the written or the visual or any other space of art. And on another conversation we have here on Portals, we have a conversation with Paul where he recounts an experience of once being in a concert and deciding that it was his job, his business, sitting in the concert hall, seeing that something was not working right for the conductor and the orchestra, to become for them the support to be able to get reattuned, reconnected to the craft and to the piece of music that they were working on. And you're describing that kind of alignment. And then when you describe that inner fortress, I suppose that's the thread, that's the inquiry of this meandering conversation of ours today, where we are asking what are some of the practices and ways and rituals that allow us, that enable us to, as whether you call yourself an artist or not, to skate to the edge of what you know, to not fall in love with how we have known ourselves yesterday, to not be identified with I am such and such and I am this kind of an artist, and to be forever in that malleable, not yet formed, emerging, discovering, newly fashioning flow, and be in that space, like here we are in a recorded conversation, and there is in it forever the attempt, can I escape the self-awareness that we are recording this and actually forget to remember that is part of what truly great artists that inspire us. I think they offer us access to something in themselves that, and even when it is technique, and even when it is methodology, they have a way of sidestepping that or getting beyond that, and we're seeking this realm, this very space of being alive, being a live player, being a live actor inside the experience of life. That is probably the essence we're after. One of those.
It's almost like flicking a switch in one's mind of pretending, perhaps, that one becomes invisible, and whatever one wants to give expression to becomes visible. So it's almost like disappearing. And unless I can disappear enough for myself and others not to overly identify me to just the physical form or whatever I've done so far, it can be very hard to let in new things. But I think it's possible to play with that switch, to practice playing with that switch and almost fade a bit. And that would almost be like a scary concept, at least also in the world. You want to stand out, you want to be vibrant. I don't know, this is a fire sign talking, but in however you would say that, oh, these are the signposts that say that I am here, that I'm alive. Almost let them go.
Yeah.
And know that at the other end of disappearing a bit more, something new will be able to reappear in you and through you.
I just wanted to offer an image. Keeps popping up in the inner state of being an artist, whether you're recognized as one or not. It feels almost like a kind of tightrope walker state.
Yes.
Not really needful to expand on why. The image is very alive in me.
Well, so how about if we bring this conversation to conclusion, or to a pause at least, with both images, walking on a tightrope, and where you are forever in the balance of the movement of that, because somehow you're able to maintain a focus that's not self-aware, that you are possibly walking on a tightrope that's very high wire walk, alongside with the image that you offered out, which is that can we flip the switch And you even try that as a mental exercise. And instead of being focused on oneself from the outside of how do I look and how do I sound and how do I come across, there is a readiness to flip a switch where we begin to disappear for ourselves, almost as though we go down a black hole and we become not the person, but we surrender to that something else, that other realm that we seek to become a vessel for or a conduit for, and let that shine rather than me, the person. Perhaps we can leave it with these two images.